Speak to a reporter now who has got incredibly involved with the refugee effort, and he is Jerome Starkey. He's defence editor of The Sun. He's reported in some of Ukraine's most dangerous cities since the war began. And reporting on the front line turned into something of a rescue mission earlier this week for 5 stranded students from a school, and he joins us now. Good morning. Thanks for being with us. What we keep hearing from people like you who are out there is that the morale of the Ukrainian people is sky high, which is quite extraordinary when you consider what they're putting up with. Have you found that as well?
Good morning, Richard. Yeah, certainly. I think there's a grim determination here to carry on, to fight this to the very last. The soldiers that I spoke to on the front line yesterday were in no illusion about what they were facing. These guys had already fought ferocious battles just further south. They'd had to retreat from a village about 10 miles further south of the position I met them in. And they said that they turned that into Stalingrad too. And they told me that in Kamionske, where I was, where we met these children from a school for the deaf, they said they were going to carry on fighting there until they ran out of ammunition. Now, that spirit is matched not just on the front lines, but that's matched by civilians. Everywhere you see them building checkpoints, manning positions, laying tank traps across the road. There's a real can-do attitude. People are using what they can to do what they can. They've turned the circus into a refugee reception centre here. They're using old car tires to block roads. It's reminiscent in some senses of the south of England in 1940 when the UK thought that the Germans were going to invade. Everyone is pulling their weight, doing their bit. Those who can't flee, those who are staying behind, principally young men of fighting age, are part of the war effort.
Well, the everyone pulling their weight, Jerome, extends to you because you went to this boarding school for deaf children and discovered that while a number of them had been sent to their homes, others didn't have anywhere to go. Now, how did you help them out?
Well, that's right. I mean, well, we were lucky. We went down to the front line, and as you said, there was this boarding school had about 150 pupils who were normally based there, and on day one of the war, almost all of them had fled to their homes, to their families, but there were 5 of them who hadn't. One of the girls, her mother was a teacher, and they lived in the same village as the school, so they had nowhere else to go. And 4 others came from homes that were in occupied territories. 2 of them came from the east of the country, in the area that's now controlled by Russian-backed separatists and has been since 2014. And 2 of them came from a town just outside Crimea to our south. And of course, that was one of the first places to be captured by the Russians when their forces marched north out of Crimea on day 1 of the conflict. So they couldn't get to their parents. Not only can they not get to them, they haven't been able to talk to them either, because the phone lines have been cut between Ukraine and those 2 and the areas under Russian control. So for them, incredibly nerve-wracking not to be able to speak to their parents. As I said, we were lucky. We'd driven down to this village in a convoy of 2 cars. We had some space. And when they realized they were there, they came back with us. So we brought them back to Zaporizhia. We took them the relative safety, I should say, of Zaporizhia, because whilst this town is only 30 miles from the front, it is a lot further away from the front than their homes. And they said that they'd essentially been living in basements for the last few days. And so they were very relieved when they got here.
You see, that story is something of a fingerprint, it seems to me, of the way that British journalists, and these are the ones who we see mostly, are reporting on this war. They're getting personally invested. I've lost count of the number of times in recent days that I've seen someone, for example, last night, Romilly Weeks, the ITV News reporter, putting her arms around somebody that she was interviewing as they shredded into tears, telling their particular story. I've seen that happening a lot. Television journalists, in particular, physically reaching out and holding people, doing things like you're doing. Have you noticed that too, that there is a really strong personal investment in this by British journalists out there in the field?
Well, I think it's always reassuring when a journalist is able to make that connection on a human level. I mean, certainly I've been shocked how moved I've been. I've covered a lot of conflicts, I've covered a lot of unpleasant situations, but certainly there was something here when I was at Zaporizhia train station a few days ago, and I saw this tide of humanity surge towards the train, and I saw women and children saying goodbye to fathers and brothers. It was absolutely heartbreaking. The men stood on the platform talking on their mobile phones, talking just a few yards away to their wives and their children who are crammed onto the train with all of these people waiting to say goodbye and not knowing when or if they would see each other again. It was absolutely heartbreaking.
The other, sorry. All right.
Go on, please go on.
OK, the other impression that we're getting increasingly, and we got it there from your opening remarks in this interview, is that the Russian army are fighting quite poorly. We're not just talking about their lack of logistical support and the technical issues that they seem to be facing, but they're not as effective fighters on the ground, toe-to-toe, as the Ukrainians are. Is that a fair assessment, that actually they're not much cop?
I think that's a very fair assessment. I think certainly what we've seen in almost 2 weeks of warfare is two very different tactics. The Russians have huge force, huge mass, huge numbers of soldiers, tanks, numbers of artillery, and the resources that come with that. What the Ukrainians appear to have done is fought very nimbly. They've been very agile. They've used small, simple, shoulder-launched weapon systems to set up ambushes, and they've fought the Russians. They've been very clever, and they've, in most cases, tried to fight the Russians on territory that they control or on the ground of their choosing. Now, that's one of the very basic principles of war. And what we've seen because of that is some fairly successful, well, very successful ambushes with devastating results for the Russians. And that's had two effects. The Russians have had significant losses. Our Chief of Defence Staff in the UK, Admiral Susanna Reid, said that Russian frontline units had been decimated. We've heard accounts of units almost totally wiped out. And as a consequence of that, we've seen the Russian advance slow to a sort of grinding pace, especially in the north around Kiev and northeast around Kharkiv, these two key cities. In the south, it's been slightly different. In the south, the Russians have made more progress, and that's near where I am. We've seen them take the city of Kherson, and yesterday they were launching an assault on the nearby city of Mykolaiv. Mykolaiv, an absolutely vital strategic city because it holds a bridge over the River Bug, and the River Bug is the last major natural obstacle between Russian forces that have come out of Crimea and the city of Odessa, the southern capital of Ukraine. If Russian forces can take Mykolaiv, then that means Odessa will be significantly under more threat.
Jerome, you've already done an incredible job to rescue those teenagers. I'm the mum of teenagers. You know, I think anybody is affected watching the number of children who've lost their lives, frankly, already, and who are fleeing, who are taking refuge in basements, and also arriving at Calais and you know, being turned back to Paris to be told, actually, you need to go back with your parents and get yourselves a visa. Those deaf children from that boarding school, where do they go?
Well, that's a really good question, and they face an uncertain future like so many of their countrymen and women. We took them to another school, another special school for deaf pupils here in Zaporizhia, which has already been evacuated. But the director of that school was there and ready to receive them. And she told us yesterday that they would now make steps to evacuate these children further west. West in Ukraine is synonymous with safety, or at least more safety. Get to the further west of the country, there's less fighting there. It's not that there's been no fighting there. There have been some Russian airstrikes, but it's closer to the borders with Poland and other neighbouring European countries. And once they're there, they've got a better chance of getting out of the country, or at least if they're going to stay in somewhere that's relatively safer.
Can we ask you, it's a difficult question for you to answer this, but just for a snap assessment, you're the defence correspondent of The Sun, you were the chief defence writer. What's your assessment? Do you think that Ukraine's going to win this?
I don't think Russia's going to win this. Let me put it like that. I think even if Russia somehow manages to accelerate its momentum and take the big cities, the strength of will here, the determination to resist, that means Russia will find itself controlling, and it will find itself with a territory, with an insurgency. Now, that was a warning that was made loud and clear before they started this conflict, and Russia knows how bloody insurgencies can be. We only need to look at their experience in Afghanistan. Of course, the Russians occupied Afghanistan for 10 years, long before the West toppled the Taliban regime. They were there from 79 to 89 and lost something like 15,000 soldiers from a Western-backed resistance led by the Afghan Mujahideen. Now, if the Russians manage to take control of large parts of Ukraine, then one can only imagine that they're going to face a similar sort of insurgency from a resistance that will be armed and resourced by the West. We've already seen the devastating damage that simple shoulder-launched missiles, simple to use and simple to supply, shoulder-launched missiles have had on the Russian forces. Now, I would expect that to continue if the Russian forces conquer the territory, I should say, of Ukraine. So in that sense, Russia can't win, I don't think. It can't win in the conventional sense. It can't win in the sense that it will annex and control this country peacefully. That raises the question, what are they trying to achieve? And it also gives some succor, I think, to the Ukrainian forces in terms of how hard they're trying to resist.
Well, that is an extremely thorough answer, Jerome, and I'm grateful for it. And congratulations to both you and all your colleagues out there who are doing a fantastic job. I think the level of reporting that we've seen coming out of Ukraine in the last couple of weeks by our British journalists, newspapermen like yourself, television, radio reporters, has been outstanding. But do stay safe, and thank you very much for being with us this morning.